Hi everybody, welcome to Learning the Program with Roblox Studio. I'm Aaron from the Funtime Games group on Roblox, and today's lesson and tutorial is going to be about the for loop. In the previous tutorial we learned about the while loop, which is another repetitive structure that helps us execute the same lines of code over and over again. The for loop is going to be the same thing, except we're going to add a control in it that keeps track of how many times we should do it, as well as what number of iteration we're on, or how many times through the loop have we been. And to get started today, what we're going to do is we're going to start building steps. Basically, you can consider them like steps in an obby if you wanted to make an obby, or steps in a stairwell for a home, but we're going to make them with script. And we're going to start by creating the first part, and then we're going to clone that part to make the steps. And then we're going to use the for loop to do all that. So to start, what we're going to do is make sure you're in either model or home, and you can see the part here. You can click on it, and we have our part in the workspace. So what we want now is we want to actually create the first step. So we want something the character can actually step on, a decent size. So what we'll actually do is we'll adjust the size by the size variable here, or the size property. And you'll notice the size property has 3 numbers in it. One corresponds to how wide it is, the second is how tall it is, and the third is how deep it is from front to back. So what we'll do is we'll make it 8 here. So it's a pretty long step, right? And we'll leave it 1 fine. It's 1 is fine height, and then we'll go to 4 deep. And so that'll be the size of our step, the three pieces of data here that correspond to the size and the X, Y, and Z axis of the object here. So now we have our first step. We'll go ahead and actually name it. We'll just call it step. And we'll begin writing our script. We'll go to server script service, hover over it, click the plus sign, and you'll see the script under drop down. Click on that. We'll start our first script. We'll erase the print hello world. And the first thing I want to do is create a variable that references the object, or that will contain the object. So what I'll do is I'll start by saying step, and that's our variable name step. Receives, and how do we make it receive the object? We'll say workspace. As you can see here, the lowest level we can have access to, and then we'll go to the children of it, so which is going to be finding which you're going to find the step in. So we'll go to workspace and then dot step, and now that is going to be the value in step. So we've created a variable that references a step. So what we want now is to create our loop, right? To create more steps from this and move them up and over. So what I'll do is I'll start by writing out 4, and then I receives 1. So what is I receives 1? Right, what does that mean? I receives 1 is going to be what a programmer we would refer to as an auto incrementer. And auto means, short for automatic, so it will automatically increment. Incrementer means just increment. So, and what do I mean by that? Well, every time it goes through a loop, it's going to add 1 to this variable. So auto increment the variable. And that is the power of the for loop. That's why right now that's what we want. We want something that's going to know the value of the iteration, or the number of the iteration that the loop is on. And for that we're going to use a for loop over a while loop, which is what we learned in the previous tutorial. And so we have 4 I receives 1, and so I receives 1 will be where our loop starts, at 1. So now we want to know, okay, we got the start point, we want to know the end point. Where is it going to end? So we'll say we'll make 25 steps. How do we tell this loop we want to run it up till I equals 25? We say comma to feed it another parameter, and the other parameter is going to be the stopping point, 25. So if we look here, we have I equals 1 and then I equals 25. And actually I didn't notice I had not enlarged this so you can see it better. So that's what I'll do now. And you can see the for I is 1, and then start at 1, and then go to 25. And then do the instructions in the loop, and then end, right? So again, you'll see end, so you know we can have a statement block in here, which means more than one instruction, and that each instruction in the block will be run in sequential order. And then if while I is less than 25, it will keep going. And as mentioned, I will always be incremented. So how am I sure of that? How do I know what the value of I is when we just said it once? Well, if we go back to print it out, normally what would happen here is if we set a variable to 1 and we just loop and print the number, we just see 25 a number once printed, right? Because we're going to go start to 1, loop 25 times, and we're just going to tell it to print the value of I. Here we set the value of I to 1, so it should say 1 25 times. But when we go to play it in this for loop, you'll notice that what I said before was correct, that it's auto increments adding 1 every time to the loop, right, to the variable I, until it reaches 25, the stopping point. So now what we want to do now is, okay, we've created something that runs 25 times, and it's going to perform everything in here, all the instructions in here 25 times, right? So what are the instructions we want to make? Our instructions we want to make are going to be to create a clone of this, right? And then say if I want to do this by hand in the studio, I would say Control D to create the clone. I would move it up by hand and move it over, and as you can see, it's going to affect its position, the 3 numbers that correspond to its position, and then I'd keep doing that, right? It would be what's a repetitive process, and that's a keyword as far as when you program, you want to use a loop to do something over and over again. If the process is repetitive or you see things repeating again, that's when that signifies that you want to use a loop. So as you can see, we're creating it. The process we're doing is over and over again. That's repetitive. Is we're cloning this object and moving it up and over. So that's what we want our script to do. And now here's the big thing: is okay, great. I understand that that's what I need to do. How do I write that in code? Okay. So that's what we're going to work on right now, and the first step is to create the clone, right? That was our first step we did when we did it in the studio manually. So to do that, we're going to say create a new variable. So we'll call it step clone, and this new variable will receive a clone of step. How do we clone the step? So a step is a part, right? And the step refers to the variable step I keep referring it to step. But what I'm referring to is the variable step refers to this part, right? And every part you make in the workplace, if I hit part again, each of these parts is going to have what's known as a clone function. And how do I make that? How do I use that clone function? And what is it? Well, the clone function basically creates a copy of that part, right? So if we go back in the studio and look at this part, it has all these properties. When I use the clone function, it creates a copy of this part with all the same data for each of the properties, right? So it's the same thing as if I hit Control D as I did earlier. What happens there? We have the same named object in the same position. And if I move it, we could see, oh, it's also has the same color, the same transparency, and it's basically a clone of it, right? So that's what clone does. Basically, it hits Control D on it, and you have all the properties cloned with the object, a new object. And so how do we call that, right? So it's a function. So what we do is we'd say step. And because we want a clone of this original part, right? We always want to clone the same one. So we're going to say step, and then to call the clone function, we're going to say colon, which you're going to have to press Shift and then Sometimes it has the colon on the key, sometimes it's the semicolon. So it's shift and then the colon, and you'll see the two dots. You got to make sure you see the two dots and not this. And if you see the semicolon with the dot and the comma on it, that's incorrect. You want to make sure you have this, the two dots, and that's how the computer knows to call the function clone, and you spell it with a capital C, L-O-N-E, and then to make sure the computer knows it's the function you want, you're going to have an open parentheses and then close parentheses. And what does this line mean? What is this telling the computer to do? So this is saying I want to use the clone function built onto the part step. And what the clone function is going to do is it's going to return a copy of that clone, a copied object with the same properties, right? And as I mentioned before, now how does this happen? Now how does this get assigned to clone then? It's a confusing line, right? But if you remember that, if you think of this as how we explained it before, is if the line had been 5 plus 4, what would occur is everything to the right of this assignment operator would get evaluated first, right? So I'd say 5 plus 4, and that would evaluate to 9, and then once it's evaluated, the 9 would be assigned to a step clone. So even though it's not math, it still needs to evaluate, right? It needs to evaluate the function property. So it evaluates, and the function then returns the object. So as the same way as you would do the math, then you would get return of 9 on this, right? You could say it would return 9, and then the 9 would be stored in the step clone. The same is true for functions you write. And now that's probably in the future, but when you write the function, if the function is returning it could be a number, it could be a string, it could be an object. So once the function is evaluated and at the end of the function returns an object, well, then we're left with that object to assign to the variable, right? And that's what this does. This creates an object that is a clone of step, and we're assigning it to step clone. So basically we just copied the step, and it's the same process as, if you could imagine, if we hit Control D on the pad, we'll have our second clone version right here. It's basically what we did in code just there. So great, now we have a copy. Now as a second step is, what do we want to do with it? We wanted to move it up and over so it mimics what a step would do. And then that comes to another kind of issue of, well, how do I do that, right? That's always the case. It's like you stop and how do I do that? So, okay, so to do that, we have now a variable that has access to our new object, right, that we just created. So, and we want our new object to be moved. So we'd say step clone, and since it's a copy of our object, right? It has the positions, or it has the properties, and one of the properties is the position of it. So we could say dot position, and that position receives. And what do we want to do? We want to take its current position and we want to add 1 up and 4 over, say, right? So we want to take its current position and add to it. So we'd say, what is its current position? Its current position is step clone dot position plus, and now what we want to do is we want to add that data. We don't just have one piece of data here, right? We have 3 numbers. What we want to do is we want to add 3 numbers plus 3 numbers. And how we tell the computer to add these thing called vectors, which is these properties with 3 numbers to them, is we'd say vector 3, right? We'd say vector 3, and since it's a new property or new object, we want to say new. And then we want to say to the computer, this is going to have 3 parameters to it, and the 3 parameters are going to be just like a position here, right? Say if we were going to copy this position, it would be -7, 0.5, 41.5, 0.5 comma. But this is the part we want to add to this. And when we do this, when we say step.clone.position, it's also a vector3 object. So what we want is to add, right? And it knows to add those two one by one. So it's going to say it's the -7 plus whatever I put first here, right? The first number of my position plus whatever I put first in this here. So I don't want to do anything to that, right? I just want to leave it alone. So 0. -7 plus 0 is -7, right? So I didn't do anything to move it left or right. So I just put 0 there. I want to move it up, and that's the y. This is number y. As you can see, I don't know if you can see this above it, but it'll tell you what parameters which. And the second number refers to height. So I want to move it up 1. So what we're doing here is the position, step clone down position is 0.5. Add 1 to it. So plus the second position plus the second position of the new object here. And that's going to be 1.5 when it's computed. Now I want to move it back 4, right? So I'm just going to put 4. Same like we were doing. So what does this do? This is going to move it up and over 4. So, and this is going to do it for each step. And the last portion of this thing is to make sure this statement block is to make sure that it is going to be in the workspace, right? It needs to be as baseplate is. We could see baseplate, right? It's an object. We click on it. We could see step. It's an object. We click on it. We need to make a child of workspace. So how do we do that? We could say, well, step clone dot parent. So the parent of the object we just cloned is or receives or is workspace. So now it's going to be a child of workspace like step or a baseplate, and we're going to actually be able to see it there. So now what's going to happen is we forgot one step, I think, right? Let me make sure that step, and we did here. So you want to make sure that the steps are anchored, right? One part I skipped over. So before we hit play and see what we made, we want to go and check a property under behavior. We want to make sure it's a step in our studio, and then click under behavior, click on anchored, and make sure the checkbox is checked. That's important because, well, we cloned it, so everything else after it is also going to be not anchored if that not anchored is clicked. So now we can hit play, and let's see what happens. Let's see what happens. Oh, we only have 2. What happened? We told the computer to make 25 of these things. What's going on? So we'll click on workspace, and we can see that, oh, wow, there are 25 objects here. So let's take a look. Each one, we click on it, we can see the blue outline. It's in the same spot. So how do we tell it we don't want the same spot? Well, we go back to script, and we say, oh, here's the problem, right? So if we set the position, each position is equal to the starting position plus the same number, each step we make is in the same position. So that's what we had occur, right? So how do we make it so each step we make is in a different position dependent on what iteration and creation loop we're in, right? Is basically what I want to do. So to do this, I'd simply know what iteration I'm on is I. So I'd say I times 1, and then I times 4. So what does this do? So if we're on our first time through the loop, I is 1, 1 is 1 is 1, 1 times 1 is 1, and 1 times 4 is 4. It moves up 1 and over 4. We go to the second loop, right? So it creates the object. We go to the second loop. Second time through, I is 2. Create the clone, and now we want to move it 2 times 1. So it goes up 2, and then it goes 8 over. And this will repeat. So this will make sure that each of our steps is equal to up and over times as many steps as we have. So it works out just right. And we can see this if we hit play. And we turn around, and there's our steps up. And these don't have to be steps, right? We can manipulate, the beauty part is we can manipulate where we want these things at now that we have it in the loop and we've created these. How we want to do that is through that area we were just looking at. So if I look at the script again, and I'll hit stop, what number here, because this is the position, right? This is the line that set the positions. What numbers here affected the height and the distance back where the step was placed? It's the 1 and the 4. So if I say I want to go way high, I'll make it 5. I want to go up 5 studs or 5 spots up every time, and then say 6 spots back every time for the step. If I hit play again, you'll see it visually what the effect of that will do with the parts. It's way stretched out now, and I have to jump now for each step. So when you have a grasp on what you can do and modify with this code, you can almost create an obby just with script. And we did it within, if you're looking at a few lines. So that's the power of scripting, and you can create and modify this, and make it turn, make it go up. You could modify this to do what you wanted to with these steps. And that'll actually leave me with what I wanted to do. I wanted to leave you with a challenge or exercise, and I'll give you a reward also for the exercise for the first person who responds with the correct answer for the exercise. And the reward is going to be, I will create a code for either one of my games or any one of my games, and if you're the first one to respond, I will make the code your username. So the code everyone enters in to get their in-game money is going to be your username. And what I'm going to do for the question that you have to answer correctly in the responses is going to pertain to this line. So what I'm going to do is say, let's say, shift create a line of code that will shift the stairs to the sides, to either side. And it could be left side or right side, but modify, what I'm basically looking for is for you to modify this line of code. I'm going to copy below it and comment it out, so that if we look back at the studio, we can see this line is basically a straight line up the stairs. I don't want a straight line. What I'm asking for is for you to do this, where if they go up, what I want them to do is to see the straight line forming here. They're going up. I want them to shift over to a side. If you can modify that this line of code to do that, and the first person to respond, I'll give them their choice of either Demoville or Mech Mayhem to create a code in, and I'll use their username as the code to enter in. And again, that's a first to the video response, or to the correct response under the video. And that'll be it for our tutorial, this tutorial on the for loop and creating steps with the for loop. If you have any questions or anything was unclear, please leave any of that in the responses, so we can either make another video or clear up some questions. And if you like the video, if it helped you, please leave a like, and be sure to subscribe so you can be the first to get a head start on these challenges whenever we do come out with them. And as always, thanks for watching, and have a good day. Bye.